The 5 cancer-feeding foods hiding in your kitchen right now. What if I told you that some of the foods sitting in your kitchen right now may be quietly increasing your cancer risk every single day without you ever realizing it? And what if I told you that the most dangerous food on today's list isn't just one food at all, but an entire category that includes many of the foods millions of people eat every day? Stay with me until the end, because the final food we're going to discuss could completely change the way you think about what you put on your plate. Before we begin, I'd love to know your age and where you're watching from today. Leave your age and country in the comments below, because I read as many comments as I can, and I genuinely enjoy seeing people from around the world who are committed to staying healthy as they get older. And if you're interested in simple, science-based health advice designed to help you stay independent, active, mentally sharp, and healthy for as long as possible, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because every week I share practical information that can help you make better decisions for your long-term health. Now let's get started. Over the last several decades, researchers have followed hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of people, tracking what they eat, how they live, and what diseases they eventually develop. These are not small studies involving a handful of volunteers. These are enormous investigations spanning years and often decades. And one finding keeps appearing again and again. Certain foods consistently show up in the diets of people who develop cancer more frequently than those who don't. In fact, for some foods, the evidence has become so convincing that many experts compare it to the early research linking smoking to lung cancer. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, I am not saying that eating a slice of bacon is as dangerous as smoking cigarettes. The risks are very different. What I'm talking about is the strength of the evidence. There was a time when people argued that the science around smoking wasn't settled. The tobacco industry spent years creating doubt. Governments were slow to act. Yet today we know exactly how that story ended. It took decades before public health policies finally caught up with the evidence. But once they did, smoking rates fell and countless lives were saved. I genuinely believe that future generations may one day look back at ultra-processed food in a similar way. Not because food is identical to tobacco, but because we are accumulating more and more evidence that certain modern foods are contributing to chronic disease on a massive scale. The challenge is that food is much harder to deal with than cigarettes. Nobody needs cigarettes to survive. You can quit smoking completely, but you cannot quit eating. Every human being needs food every single day. The question is not whether we eat. The question is what we choose to eat most often. Before we continue, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. This video is not about fear. One meal will not give you cancer. One hot dog will not give you cancer. One soda will not give you cancer. One barbecue will not give you cancer. Cancer usually develops over many years through repeated damage to the DNA inside our cells. What we're talking about today are foods that, when eaten regularly over long periods of time, may slowly increase the odds against us. Think of health like a bank account. Every healthy choice is a small deposit. Every unhealthy habit is a small withdrawal. One transaction won't make much difference, but after years and decades the balance becomes impossible to ignore. And with that in mind, let's begin with the first food on today's list, one of the foods with the strongest evidence linking it to cancer: processed meat. This includes bacon, sausages, hot dogs, pepperoni, salami, ham, deli meats, and many other meats that have been cured, smoked, salted, or chemically preserved. Many people are shocked when they learn that the World Health Organization classifies processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen. That sounds frightening, but it's important to understand what it actually means. The classification refers to how confident scientists are that something causes cancer, not how dangerous it is compared with other carcinogens. In other words, researchers are highly confident that processed meat increases the risk of colorectal cancer. One reason is the presence of nitrites and nitrates, chemicals often used to preserve these products and maintain their color. Inside the digestive tract, these compounds can be converted into substances called nitrosamines, which can damage DNA. And damaged DNA is where many cancers begin. Every cell in your body contains a set of instructions. When those instructions become damaged and the damage is copied repeatedly, abnormal cells can begin to grow out of control. Processed meats also contain heme iron, which gives red meat its deep color. Research suggests that heme iron can contribute to the formation of harmful compounds in the bowel and may irritate the lining of the colon. Over years and decades, this repeated exposure may increase cancer risk. But what happens when these meats are cooked at extremely high temperatures? That brings us to the second food on today's list: heavily charred and burnt foods. Think about blackened barbecue meat, burnt toast, overcooked burgers, or foods cooked directly over flames until parts become dark and crispy. Many people love that smoky flavor. I understand that. I enjoy spending time with family around a barbecue just like anyone else. But understanding the difference between occasional enjoyment and regular exposure is important. When meat is cooked at very high temperatures, compounds called heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons can form. You don't need to remember those names. What matters is understanding that these compounds have been shown in laboratory studies to damage DNA. The hotter the cooking temperature and the more heavily charred the food becomes, the greater the concentration of these compounds may be. Once again, risk matters. A couple of barbecues each year are very different from regularly eating heavily blackened foods several times a week. Health is not determined by one meal. It's determined by patterns repeated over years. One healthy meal won't make you healthy, and one unhealthy meal won't make you sick. The real question is what happens most of the time. If you regularly cook with high heat, try to avoid burning food. Remove blackened portions when possible. Cook a little more gently and include plenty of vegetables alongside grilled meats. Small adjustments may not seem important today, but over decades they can make a meaningful difference. Now, if processed meat and burnt food seem concerning, the next item affects far more people because millions consume it every single day. Sugary drinks. And this is where many people become confused. You've probably heard someone say that sugar feeds cancer. The reality is more complicated than that. The problem isn't that sugar magically turns into cancer. The problem is what excessive sugar consumption does to the body's internal environment over many years. Think about soft drinks, sweetened teas, energy drinks, flavored coffees, fruit juices, and many bottled smoothies. These beverages deliver large amounts of sugar very quickly. Because they contain little or no fiber, the sugar enters the bloodstream rapidly. Blood sugar rises sharply. The pancreas releases insulin, and the body works hard to restore balance. If this happens occasionally, it's not a major issue. But when it happens multiple times every day for years, the body begins to change. Cells become less responsive to insulin, a condition known as insulin resistance. The body responds by producing even more insulin. Excess sugar is also stored as fat, especially visceral fat, the dangerous fat that surrounds internal organs deep inside the abdomen. Unlike the fat beneath your skin, visceral fat is biologically active. It constantly releases inflammatory chemicals into the bloodstream. And chronic inflammation is one of the recurring themes in cancer research. Imagine a small fire burning continuously inside the body. Not enough to cause immediate damage, but enough to create stress year after year. That's essentially what chronic inflammation does. It creates conditions that may make disease more likely over time. Elevated insulin levels and growth signals such as IGF-1 can also encourage cells to grow and divide more frequently. Combined with chronic inflammation, this creates an environment in which abnormal cells may be more likely to survive and multiply. And that's why reducing sugary drinks is one of the simplest and most powerful changes many people can make for their long-term health. Now let's move on to the fourth food category on today's list. And this is where several cancer-promoting factors begin to come together in a single meal. I'm talking about deep-fried fast food. This category includes fried chicken, French fries, onion rings, fried snacks, and many of the meals commonly sold through fast food restaurants around the world. And I want to be very precise here because there is a lot of misinformation online. Many people have heard claims that seed oils themselves are directly causing cancer. The reality is more complicated than that. The bigger concern is often what happens when oils are heated to extremely high temperatures and then reused repeatedly throughout the day. In commercial kitchens, large vats of oil may remain hot for hours at a time. As these oils are repeatedly heated and exposed to oxygen, they begin to break down. This process creates oxidation products and other compounds that may contribute to cellular damage and inflammation. But the oil is only part of the story. Deep-fried fast food often combines multiple health problems into one convenient package. You have refined carbohydrates, excessive calories, added sugars, large portions, processed ingredients, and unhealthy eating patterns all arriving together. Over time, this combination promotes weight gain, insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, and obesity. And obesity is now recognized as one of the strongest risk factors for multiple forms of cancer. Researchers have linked excess body fat to cancers of the colon, breast, pancreas, kidney, liver, and several other organs. Many people think of body fat as simply stored energy, but the reality is far more complex. Fat tissue is biologically active. It releases hormones and inflammatory chemicals that influence nearly every system in the body. As body fat accumulates, particularly around the abdomen, the internal environment becomes increasingly favorable to chronic disease. So the danger of deep-fried fast food isn't just one ingredient. It's the combination of high calories, poor nutrition, inflammation, and metabolic disruption repeated over many years. And that brings us to the fifth and final food category on today's list, the category that connects almost everything we've discussed so far. Ultra-processed foods. If there is one thing I hope you remember from this entire video, let it be this. Ultra-processed foods may be one of the most important health challenges of our generation. These are foods that have been heavily industrially manufactured and often contain ingredients you would never use in your own kitchen. Artificial flavorings, colorings, preservatives, emulsifiers, stabilizers, refined starches, refined sugars, industrial oils, and dozens of other ingredients designed to improve texture, shelf life, and profitability. Now, not all processed food is bad. Frozen vegetables are processed. Canned beans are processed. Plain yogurt is processed. The problem isn't processing itself. The problem is ultra-processing. Food that has been altered so extensively that it barely resembles the ingredients it originally came from. And if you look back at the foods we've already discussed today, you'll notice something interesting. Processed meats are often ultra-processed. Sugary drinks are ultra-processed. Much of the fast food consumed around the world is ultra-processed. Many packaged snacks, frozen meals, desserts, breakfast cereals, and convenience foods fall into this category as well. This is why I said at the beginning that the final food on today's list contains many of the others. Because ultra-processed food has quietly become the foundation of the modern diet. For many people, more than half of their daily calories now come from ultra-processed products. And the evidence linking these foods to chronic disease continues to grow stronger every year. Study after study has associated high consumption of ultra-processed foods with obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, dementia, depression, and multiple forms of cancer. The reason appears to be that several harmful mechanisms are working together at the same time. These foods tend to cause rapid blood sugar spikes. They often contain very little fiber. They disrupt the gut microbiome. They promote chronic inflammation. And perhaps most importantly, they encourage people to eat far more calories than they actually need. One of the most fascinating discoveries in nutrition research is that when people are given diets high in ultra-processed foods, they often consume hundreds of extra calories per day without even realizing it. Not because they're lazy, not because they lack discipline, but because these foods have been specifically engineered to be extremely rewarding. Food scientists spend years studying the perfect combination of sugar, salt, fat, texture, and flavor. They understand exactly how to create products that keep people reaching for another bite. The goal is not necessarily to nourish you. The goal is to sell more product. And this is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Because ultimately, ultra-processed foods exist primarily because they are profitable. Large food corporations generate billions of dollars every year. They employ enormous numbers of people. They contribute substantial tax revenue. And they have every incentive to keep selling as much food as possible. This doesn't require a conspiracy. It's simply how the system works. Businesses are rewarded for growth. They're rewarded for increasing sales. They're rewarded for maximizing profits. But your health is not their responsibility. Your health is your responsibility. And while that may sound discouraging at first, I actually think it's incredibly empowering. Because it means you don't need to wait for anyone else to solve this problem. You don't need to wait for governments to introduce new regulations. You don't need to wait for food manufacturers to reformulate their products. You can begin making better choices today. The reality is that meaningful public health change often takes decades. Remember smoking. The evidence linking smoking to lung cancer existed long before governments finally took action. The same may eventually happen with ultra-processed food. But while politicians debate and corporations market their products, your health continues moving in one direction or another every single day. That's why knowledge is so powerful. The more you understand about food, the more control you gain over your future. And here's something remarkable that I've noticed over and over again. Healthy eating becomes easier as knowledge increases. At first it feels difficult. At first it feels restrictive. At first it feels like you're giving something up. But gradually something changes. You start reading labels. You become aware of ingredients. You learn simple recipes. You discover healthier foods that you genuinely enjoy. And one day, almost without realizing it, your eating habits have transformed completely. Not because someone forced you, not because a doctor scared you, but because you understand what you're eating and why it matters. The truth is that most people don't need a complicated diet. They don't need expensive supplements. They don't need miracle cures. What they need is more real food, more vegetables, more fruit, more beans, more nuts, more fish, more whole grains, more meals prepared at home, more foods that their grandparents would instantly recognize as food. Because if there's one lesson I hope you take away from this video, it's this. Eat more foods that come from nature and fewer foods that come from factories. Choose foods that nourish your body instead of simply stimulating your appetite. Remember that every meal is a vote for the future version of yourself. The person you'll be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. The body you live in tomorrow is being built by the choices you make today. None of us can guarantee that we'll never develop cancer. Life doesn't offer those guarantees. But we can absolutely stack the odds more heavily in our favor. We can reduce risk. We can support our bodies. We can make choices that improve our chances of living longer, healthier, and more independent lives. And the beautiful thing is that you don't have to be perfect. You don't need to change everything overnight. Start small. Replace one sugary drink. Cook one extra meal at home this week. Add one serving of vegetables to your dinner. Choose fruit instead of a processed dessert. Small actions repeated consistently are far more powerful than dramatic changes that last only a few days. Because health isn't built through perfection. It's built through consistency. And consistency, over years and decades, changes everything. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone you care about because it genuinely helps more people discover this information. And before you leave, I'd love to hear from you. Which of the foods we discussed today do you think is hardest to avoid? And what is one change you're willing to make this week for your health? Leave your answer in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people you love. Stay healthy, stay active, and I'll see you in the next video.